Good morning! Unless it's not, I'm going in. That's right, hit Control and Shift and N because today, I'm incognito. Why, you ask? Industrial sabotage, of course. See, I have to stop them. Video game companies are making way too many video games, and I don't have time to play them all. So I have to make a successful cartridge-based video game that all of the factories will want to make because it's so popular, so they won't have time to make anything else. And where better to start than one of the most successful video game consoles of all time, successor. Sir, what do you know about the secret to success for the Nintendo 3DS?
Leave me alone.
As you can see, I have my work cut out for me, so let's take a look at the system's most successful games and see if we can get some info ourselves.
The Nintendo 3DS was the official successor to the most popular handheld ever, and the scourge of any fan of the number 2.
You'll get your chance someday. Not now. Can't you see we're mourning?
Naturally, Nintendo couldn't release a new console of any sort without diving into some strange gimmick. The Wii U already took the gimmick of failing, so the 3DS would have to find its own thing. Glasses-free 3D. A gimmick so powerful, it existed even before Nintendo did it. 3D movies were pretty popular around that time. I'm not exactly sure why, but I'm sure you've all seen those ridiculous movies with random, unnecessary 3D that doesn't add to the story at all. Well, now we can have random, unnecessary 3D that doesn't add to our gameplay at all.
Just adjust this slider here, and now I have the added perk of being blind. The Nintendo DS is one of the most successful systems of all time, just short of the PS2 by about 1 million units. So what do you do when you have a successful child? Induce labor!
The DS is a cheater. Its sales numbers include all of its revisions, including the DSi, which had its own exclusive library of downloadable games. The 3DS, of course, would do no such thing. It felt like the system took forever to die. In reality, it lived about as long as any other console, and generally had more good titles.
Had more bad ones, too.
Some may say it isn't dead yet. To them, I say, what's the last 3DS game you bought?
That question wins me a lot of arguments.
The last Nintendo published title on the system was Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn in 2019. If you're like me and don't consider ports, the 3DS never actually existed.
What the hell is this?
The 3DS was a go-to console for porting, considering it was powerful enough to kind of run games. Most of the ports were from older consoles, like the HD remakes of the N64 Zelda titles, but a couple of Wii U games even made it to this system. I never said they were good. But if anything, the ports to this system only helped give reasons to buy a 3DS to begin with. Most of them weren't the most popular games. Most of them anyway, but we'll get to that. I want to start near the top and work my way up the chain, and see if there's something about the best 3DS games that just grabbed people. And at number 15, we have Monster Hunter Generations. Why this was the Monster Hunter game that sold the most, I couldn't say. Maybe by this point more Monster Hunter fans had gotten a 3DS? I never really liked this title quite as much. The hub area being split into 4 kind of annoyed me, and for some reason the monsters just weren't as iconic as the previous entries for me.
Keep in mind, I never played a Monster Hunter game until a few months before this one came out. And of course, I'm splitting hairs here. Most Monster Hunter games are pretty much the same at their core. Hit big things with a somehow bigger stick.
Monster Hunter is something I like to call anime as hell.
All anime goes to hell, and you can't prove otherwise.
It isn't quite as in-your-face about it, but the player has a weapon that would put Cloud Strife to shame, and there's a bunch of weird, unexplained, slightly cute things, like the poses, or the fact that cats cook the food and fight by your side. I've put a lot of hours into it, so I'm not entirely surprised that Monster Hunter makes the list. Just a bit surprised that this is the Monster Hunter that makes the list.
That title was a bit more on the hardcore gamer side, which is strange. You never really think of Nintendo for having their hardcore titles. But if anything, the 3DS was a perfect place for them. It's not like the Wii U was. But being a handheld, there did have to be a limit on how far you could stray away from casual games. And probably the most casual game on this list,
Nintendogs. And cats!
It had to go downhill somewhere.
Nintendogs was a franchise that started on the Nintendo DS, a casual title that started an interesting gaming fad. See, when the first video games were created, the ultimate goal was to give us adventures we couldn't have in real life.
Like owning a cat?
And since we were veering ever closer to real interaction in our video games, I guess the touchscreen counts, it was the perfect time to introduce a new Tamagotchi. At least it's not the Kinect one. I'm sure Nintendogs is one of the more well-known franchises on the original DS. It was such a casual crowd console, and Nintendogs was the go-to casual title. It's a good time, raise some animals, buy them stuff, play with them, standard cuteness simulator. But the 3DS decided to go one step further. Dogs weren't enough anymore, they needed cats!
I've been around a lot of cats, and I'm pretty sure need is a strong word. Other than that, though, same game. I did a little bit of research for this, and I'm pretty sure it kind of cheated a little bit, too. While the sales list lumps it all into Nintendogs and cats, there are actually 3 different titles with different breeds of animal. 4 if you count the one exclusive to Japan. Now, you may be thinking, why does that matter? People aren't going to buy 2 different games with different breeds of animal when they're the same game. You look me in the eye right now and tell me that there aren't people out there that bought 2 of these games. But of course, Nintendo consoles always have a little something for everyone. After a hardcore title and a casual title, the next thing that they needed to move on with great sales is a way to exploit people's nostalgia.
I've mentioned before that Ocarina of Time is one of the most popular video games ever created, and I stand by that. Which is exactly why it re-released on 3DS and outsold most of the 3DS's native software. There's not a whole lot to say about this package. Nintendo is always a bit rough about making their older games available. We didn't always live in an age where the NES and SNES had their major titles available as part of basic internet.
See, I wasn't gonna buy internet just for Smash, but throw in Mighty Bomb Jack and I'm sold.
So having one of the most industry-changing titles available on a modern system with updated graphics and improved aiming was awesome. Even being available on the Switch now, I think there's still value in the 3DS version. It's just so charming and small, and I just like gyroscope controls, okay? But what could possibly outsell one of the most popular video games of all time?
One of the worst!
Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Calling it the worst would be an exaggeration, but so would calling me honest. I liked this game enough when it came out, but only barely enough. The sales of this title don't really reflect its quality in this case. It was just the first sequel to a cult classic from the GameCube era, and it released during a time of peak nostalgia for the GameCube. You have to buy the game before you know it's bad. For those of you who haven't played the original Luigi's Mansion,
first of all, go do that.
It was a fun, short little adventure through a haunted mansion. It wasn't scary, but it had that general air of spooky. You know, things that are themed around scary elements, but not designed to scare you. At least I hope it wasn't designed to scare me. Explore the mansion, suck up ghosts, all the usuals, but the sequel decided to add more mansions and make the game mission-based.
Gah!
It was on a handheld system. Having long amounts of exploration with no reminder of what to do wouldn't fit. The level-based system allows you to pick up easily where you left off, but it was such a disappointment. I'm older now, and I feel like Nintendo could never recreate the magic of the original Luigi's Mansion. That's just not how AAA titles work anymore. But man, that era still holds the secrets to my heart.
Sorry, ladies, but you're no GameCube.
And as much as I'd love to sit here and suck off the ghost of a ghostly game, there are still a lot of titles left. Nintendogs may have scratched an itch for the casual crowd, but Nintendo platforms and fans have this weird subgroup who like really weird casual games. They aren't really accessible to the public like other casual games are supposed to be, but they're usually really laid back at the same time. On the 3DS, this game was Tomodachi Life.
I don't know what the hell this game is.
I've never owned a Tomodachi Life. I'm hoping they remember to write that on my grave. But I've seen a lot of videos, and this game may look simple, but it seems so weird. Essentially, you just kind of watch a bunch of Miis do random stuff. There are some interactive bits and some creative bits, but really you just make some Miis and watch them do Mii stuff. It's like a God game if God were a lazy alcoholic soap opera fan.
I would say more, but this is definitely one of those games you have to play to understand, and while I have a lot of time on my hands, I don't have a lot of Tomodachis. But weird titles definitely had a market on the 3DS eShop, and I actually did own this next one.
Yokai Watch 2 cheated kind of like Nintendogs, having 2 titles that were essentially the same, but looking at the list there are 4 more famous cheaters left, and this game was at least slightly justified. See, Yokai Watch is like the Japanese Pokemon.
Unlike Pokemon, which is not Japanese.
While Pokemon got really popular in the West and started to make minor changes to appeal more to us over here, Yokai Watch stayed true to those Japanese roots. But like Pokemon, the second title decided to have two separate, slightly different titles, hence the cheating, just like Pokemon.
Wink, wink, cough, cough, subtlety.
Full disclosure, I love these games. They're not super complex. They work similarly to Pokemon, except using Japanese yokai, spirits that essentially control all of the good or bad things that happen. In order to catch more, though, you just kind of have to luck into it. As a matter of fact, aside from overworld travel and puzzles, you don't actually actively do much in this whole game. Battles are mostly automated, with you having to manage debuffs and ultimate attacks. Aside from that, just pick a good team, rotate the correct ones in at the correct times, win.
It's an interesting title, but just because I love it doesn't mean I can't find a way to complain. Why hasn't Yokai Watch 4 come to the US yet? But still though, it was really fun just trying to find the best combination of team members and manage them from afar. And since it wasn't trying to appeal to us over in the States, it still has that weird, wacky Japan vibe to it.
But every one-off success has its massive, world-devouring inspiration that takes up 4 whole spots on this list. The other 3 are all next to each other, so I'll mention more then. But here at number 9, we have Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I didn't play those ones, actually. By this point, I had started to lose faith in Pokemon. It had been so many years of the same games, and while obviously they're still making money doing that, I didn't want them to make my money doing that.
I still bought Pokemon Shield and Pokemon Arceus. Curse you, multi-million-dollar companies! And since I don't know a whole lot about this title, and there are 3 more on the list later, I'm gonna just skip ahead to the next entry, which honestly, I'm surprised is this low on the list.
Super Smash Bros. For 3DS had to share its sales with the Wii U version of the game. Since the Wii U didn't sell well, you'd think the 3DS version would compensate, but that's what you get for thinking.
That's why I never do!
This game is fine, but looking back at the franchise, it does feel like every other game is somebody's favorite. If you know somebody who likes Smash 3DS most, I have news for you, they're a psychopath. But even then, this was a pretty big game. I'm honestly shocked that it didn't top this list. I remember the ability to play Smash on the go was big, and I would constantly whip this bad boy out at lunchtime at school to play with friends. Yes, I was the most popular, I promise.
But it can always be worse. You could be outsold by Super Mario 3D Land.
Every Nintendo console must have a Mario game, and by a Mario game I mean 5. The 3DS was no exception, and honestly, while I don't think it's a huge game for the franchise or anything, 3D Land was a great 3D Mario on a handheld. Unless you count Odyssey, technically the best 3D Mario on a handheld. It was a great game, it deserves the sales, I just don't like that it got them. I know it doesn't make sense, but neither does Mario.
He's a plumber!
3D Land was an interesting concept. Take the 2D Mario games and translate them as directly as possible to 3D. And instead of just taking the character and adding a dimension, they took everything. Levels had 3 collectible coins that unlocked extra levels. Each level was just a run to the other side to reach a flagpole, queue 8 worlds and a castle, boom. It's 2D Mario, but it also isn't. This was really interesting to me when I was younger, because I fell for the 3D is better scam. But now I think I'd prefer more standout adventures, rather than just tight, bland platforming. The levels are fine, it's just titles like these that default to the standard grassland, ice, desert, with enemies that are like Goomba, Koopa. It's been done before, Nintendo, move on!
Speaking of moving on, I'm really good at transitions. The 3DS during this era kind of became the place where major titles were released for the franchises that fans have been waiting for. I mean, throwing those titles on the Wii U might have made that console successful, and that just won't do. Like, yes, I would love an HD Animal Crossing title on a system with a separate screen for inventory management, but Nintendo is better at exploiting us than Tom Nook, so shut up and deal with your 3DS version.
Animal Crossing feels right at home on a handheld system. And as someone who's never played a handheld Animal Crossing, I'm definitely the right guy to say that. These games are all about town management, exploration, and relaxation. You can just do whatever you want, really, which makes them perfect to just pick up randomly whenever your 3DS ends up in your hands.
Somebody please help me!
The Animal Crossing franchise is notorious for not adding a whole lot from title to title, but New Leaf surprisingly did. Better town management systems and a few new tools may not seem like much, but in a game that's about collecting all the bugs and gyrating musical statues, we take what we can get.
Oh sweet, Nintendo never shot me in the last game.
And considering how well New Horizons sold on the Switch with about the same amount of new stuff, I'm starting to think that the fanbase has a kink involving raccoon debt. But both of those titles seemed like genuinely great games, and I've heard nothing but praise from anyone who played them.
I just don't tend to spend more than like 30 hours on most games, and I've heard Animal Crossing gets real good around the 300-hour mark. Lucky for us, Nintendo always knows what we want. And what do we want?
Mario!
You're really ruining this for me.
It wouldn't be the best-selling list on a Nintendo console if Mario didn't shove his mustache in our face at least twice. While 3D Land was busy turning 2D into something more, New Super Mario Bros. 2 was busy crippling the Wii U. This game released mere months before the Wii U 2D Mario, and whoever was in charge of Nintendo marketing and release timing almost definitely does not work there anymore. This game was fine, just a standard 2D Mario title, this time with a focus on collecting a bunch of coins. But these assets look pretty much the same as every Mario game in the new series. It's really hard to tell them apart, which makes it really hard to like any specific one. Like, I thought I really liked the 3DS one, but as it turns out...
Not again!
2D games are always more approachable than 3D ones, less to worry about for the non-gamers out there. But I think the big draw here was actually the number 2.
I didn't think it would be so soon.
New Super Mario Bros. 1 was the best-selling game on the DS by a long shot.
Well, there goes that video idea. Spoilers, sheesh.
The Wii version didn't come close to matching its numbers, and I think this game felt like it was more directly tied to the DS one. So while the game was mediocre, it was related to a game that was really mediocre. I mean, beloved.
2D Mario, 3D Mario, Luigi Mario, Fighting Mario. It's amazing how much one franchise can dominate a console. You thought I was talking about Mario dominating the console, but I still have 3 Pokemon titles in a row to talk about.
At number 4 is Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, number 3 is Sun Moon, and number 2 is X and Y.
I'll take random unrelated words for 400, Alex.
No you won't, those last 2 were letters. Pokemon is a big deal. It topped the Game Boy and GBA lists for a reason.
Well, there goes that video.
Having all of its main entries be handheld titles was just the norm. And honestly, I think these titles were some of the best in the franchise. I think we all hold the most love for whatever games came out when we were growing up. I grew up with Sapphire, meaning a remake of those games is awesome. And these specific remakes were even good, something most remakes never quite managed. Sun and Moon, of course, had a decent spread of Pokemon if you didn't like ice types, and the tropical island theme was nice. It also started to move away from the grid system that every game before it used, but it also took away the gym battles. Normally breaking the formula is a good thing, but fans really didn't like this for some reason.
Could you imagine being that picky about video games?
And X and Y were the first games on the system, meaning they were the first to get the 3D model treatment. There had been 3D Pokemon games before, but they weren't main titles, and even the ones that had similar gameplay still had their fair share of limitations. So having a truly 3D Pokemon game was guaranteed to sell well, and it did. Nothing was super out of the ordinary with any of these titles, however. The gameplay was all pretty standard, and people seemed to like the story of X and Y to a certain extent, but I usually hear more praise for Black and White on that front. Pokemon just sells. Nothing more to it.
But what could stand above the Titan? Pokemon is one of the biggest franchises ever, with an anime, a card game, so many spin-offs. What could possibly...
Mario!
Okay, fine, more Mario.
Pokemon may have dominated the markets for half of Nintendo's handheld franchises, but Mario was sick of it on the 3DS. He was the mascot after all. He needed to be on top. So he was, with Mario Kart 7 on the 3DS. Everybody always tells me this is one of the weaker entries, which means there are about 18.97 million liars. I know I'm being reductive. The main reason Double Dash only sold about 7 million is because the GameCube barely outsold Mario Kart 7. And Mario Kart Wii outsold most games Nintendo has ever published. But from the numbers, it seems pretty clear that even a bad Mario Kart is still Mario Kart. Handheld gaming was always a bit harder to do multiplayer with, since multiple people needed a system. But with the DS and 3DS, multiple people already owned a system, meaning simple pick-up and play multiplayer fit in so well. The big innovation for 7 was flight. Mario has never been a fan of physics, so he decided that these tiny paper airplanes could keep go-karts in flight, and there were zero problems with this. Even though it's the top-selling game on the 3DS, there isn't a whole lot to say about it. I mean, it's just Mario Kart again. The roster was a bit weird. The Queen Bee from Galaxy and Wiggler were both playable, but it's not like they made a huge leap forward. They just made Mario Kart.
Somewhere in the Nintendo offices, there's just a button labeled Print Money, and they press it whenever they want a new Mario Kart title. But looking at the best games for this console has helped me realize something. This console sucks! Going hand in hand with the Wii U, this system just had the unfortunate timing of being during the dark age of Nintendo. I mean, it's not like there were that many bad games, but Nintendo had never made a bad game before. They had to try it out somewhere. And while that mostly applied to the Wii U, it does seem to have affected the 3DS a little bit as well. I mean, the 3DS didn't sell terribly. It did have like 7 console revisions to try and boost that number, but it still didn't even come close to the individual game sales of some of the bigger Nintendo consoles out there. And while I love the 3DS and all of the adventures that came along with it, it doesn't really have a lot that you can't just experience somewhere else. The Mario titles were generic, Pokemon will never stop taking your money, and god damn it, Yokai Watch 4 still isn't in the US! When all is said and done, it feels like I shouldn't really miss this system. I'm still going to, of course, but we are lucky enough to have so many other great titles that can satisfy any cravings we might get for these games. But this thing still has Rhythm Heaven Megamix, it can never die!